Brothers and sisters, sons and daughters of Africa, I stand before you not to entertain your ears, but to awaken your spirit. I stand not to remind you of what you already know, but of what you may have forgotten in the noise of distractions and the silence of betrayal. There comes a time in every generation when a man rises not for his own name, but for the dignity of his people. That man does not seek comfort. That man does not kneel before foreign powers. That man does not smile for the cameras while his people weep in the dust. That man carries the burden of a wounded nation on his back and walks into the storm without flinching. I speak today of such a man, a son of the soil who rose from the heart of Burkina Faso, not to bow to the West, but to rise for Africa. He did not speak in riddles, he spoke in fire. He did not decorate his office with empty promises, he armed his leadership with truth. In a world full of cowards dressed as politicians, Ibrahim Traoré emerged like a lion among hyenas. Where others negotiated their people's future at tables of exploitation, he stood and said, "Enough." He is not a myth, he is not a memory, he is a living flame. He reminds us that leadership is not about age, it is about purpose. He reminds us that you do not need gray hair to have wisdom, you need a clean heart. And above all, he reminds us that Africa will never be respected until it respects itself, until it fears no enemy and bows to no master. Today, I come not to glorify a man, but to call upon the spirit that man has awakened, the spirit that says we are not too weak to rise, we are too strong to remain down. They say in this world built on illusions, truth is the most dangerous weapon. They say when a man dares to name the forces that exploit his people, he becomes a threat. And so when Ibrahim Traoré stood before the world and called out the myth of African dependency, he was not simply giving a speech. He was starting a revolution of the mind. He spoke with a voice that had been buried beneath decades of silence. He reminded us that Africa does not lack resources. It lacks the power to control them. That we are not poor, we are plundered. That we do not suffer from misfortune, we suffer from mismanagement designed by those who benefit from our pain. He did not whisper, he roared. He said what many feared to say, that Africa is kept in chains not by accidents of history, but by systems of theft dressed as diplomacy. They told us we were dependent, but he showed us that the dependency was manufactured. They gave us loans we didn't ask for, with interest rates designed to drown us. They sold us back our own resources, then called it trade. They built military bases on our land, not to protect us, but to protect their control. They praised our elections, even when our people starved, and they gave medals to our leaders, even when our nations bled. This is the myth he shattered. This is the mask he removed. When Traoré said Africa must stop begging, he was not speaking from pride. He was speaking from pain, the pain of a continent that feeds the world but cannot feed its children. The pain of lands rich in gold, but people trapped in poverty. The pain of being told to wait, to be patient, while others grow rich from your suffering. And so he did not wait. He did not ask for permission. He stood up and declared that the age of begging is over, that the age of submission is over, that the time has come to speak with our own voice, walk with our own feet, and build with our own hands. And he spoke not only to Burkina Faso, but to all of Africa. He reminded us that if one nation dares to stand, others will follow, that if one voice dares to shout, others will join the chorus, because truth is contagious. Courage is contagious, and when one man speaks the truth in a room full of lies, that truth begins to grow. It grows in the hearts of the youth. It grows in the dreams of the workers. It grows in the silence of the mothers. Until one day the truth becomes too loud to ignore, and that is why they fear him, because he did not ask for their aid. He questioned it. He did not celebrate their support. He investigated it. He did not thank them for crumbs. He demanded the bakery. He said that real partnership is not charity, it is justice, and that until Africa controls its land, its laws, its labor, and its leadership, there will be no peace. He said that freedom is not found in treaties signed in secret rooms, but in the hearts of a people who choose to rise. And when he said this, he did not look down. He looked straight into the eyes of the world and told them, "We see you. We know your game, and we are no longer playing it." He challenged the economic structures designed to keep Africa weak. He questioned the institutions that pretend to help but continue to exploit. He exposed the double standards of a global system that punishes the poor for being poor while rewarding the rich for stealing, and he did not do this from theory. He did it from experience, from the experience of watching his people work from sunrise to sunset and still go to bed hungry, from the experience of knowing that the wealth beneath their feet was not theirs to touch, from the experience of leading a nation forced to fight not just for survival, but for sovereignty. And so he spoke, not as a politician, not as a soldier, but as a son of Africa, and his words carried the weight of generations, generations who fought for land, for dignity, for justice, generations who were told they were nothing, generations who now, through his voice, began to believe again, believe that dependency is not our destiny, that foreign domination is not our fate, that we can stand not because the world allows us to, but because we choose to. That is what makes him dangerous. That is what makes him powerful. That is what makes him necessary. So I say to you, when you hear his name, do not just remember a man. Remember a movement of truth in a world full of lies, a movement of dignity in a system built on exploitation, a movement that says Africa is not the begging hand of the world. It is the beating heart of the future, and that is why the time for fear is over. They say sovereignty is sacred, but in Africa it has been sold cheaply, sold in exchange for foreign presence on our soil, for flags that do not belong to us flying above our skies, for agreements written in languages we did not speak and signed by leaders who did not ask the people. They said the presence of foreign forces was for our safety. They said their boots on our land were to protect our peace. But the truth, brothers and sisters, is that their security has never been for us. It has always been for them. The minerals beneath our ground, the energy within our rivers, the gold in our soil, and the oil under our feet, that is what they came to protect, not the African child, not the African mother, not the African nation. When Ibrahim Traoré stood and said it was time to reclaim our land, not only with borders but with purpose, he was not simply making a military decision. He was making a spiritual declaration. He was saying to the world, we are no longer afraid. He was saying to the people, we are no longer blind. He was saying to history, we are no longer silent, because the chains that hold us today are not only economic, they are psychological, cultural, and military. And until we remove those chains from every corner, we will remain in bondage even when we walk freely. He dared to take back what rightfully belongs to the people. He did not ask foreign troops to leave politely. He demanded it with the authority of a leader who serves the people and not external masters. And when they asked him why, he gave them the answer they did not expect. He told them the truth. That foreign troops had not brought peace, that they had brought dependency, that in the name of fighting terrorism they had institutionalized fear, that in the name of democracy they had funded division, and that in the name of cooperation they had built walls around the sovereignty of African nations. They claimed to be helping us fight insecurity, but the insecurity only grew. They claimed to be supporting development, but the poverty only deepened. They said they were here to stabilize the region, but all they did was stabilize their control. So when Traoré looked around and saw that peace had become a myth and justice a memory, He did what leaders before him had feared to do. He chose his people over politics. He chose dignity over deals. He chose the hard road of self-reliance over the comfortable chains of foreign presence, and the world took notice. Not because it was the first time an African leader had made such a decision, but because it was the first time in a long time that one had done so without flinching, without compromise, without apology. They realized that this man could not be swayed, that he could not be lured with promises or silenced with pressure, because he was not serving his position. He was serving his people. He was not speaking for headlines. He was speaking for history. And in that moment he became more than a head of state. He became a statement that said Africa is done being policed by outsiders, that the time has come for African problems to be solved by African solutions, led by African minds and secured by African hands. When he stood firm in the face of threats, he reminded the world that power rooted in principle is unshakable, that when a leader walks in truth, the weapons formed against him lose their aim, because you cannot defeat a man who is prepared to lose everything but his soul. You cannot corner a leader whose heart beats with the rhythm of his people's pain, and you cannot silence a generation that has finally found its voice in the courage of one man. That is why his stand matters, not just for Burkina Faso, but for every African nation still trapped in agreements they did not choose, still hosting armies that do not serve them, still clinging to partnerships that only benefit others. His decision was not isolation, it was liberation, it was not rejection, it was reclamation, and in doing so he reminded us that freedom is not given, it is taken, it is earned, it is defended, and sometimes it is shouted from the rooftops until the world has no choice but to listen. So I say this to all who hear my voice. Sovereignty is not a speech, it is a struggle. It is not a slogan, it is a sacrifice. And until we have the courage to walk away from the chains disguised as aid, the uniforms disguised as protection, and the lies disguised as diplomacy, we will remain occupied, even while we wave our flags. They have always feared the voice of the African youth. They have feared it not because it is loud, but because it is true, not because it is angry, but because it is awake. And when Ibrahim Traoré stood up and called upon the youth to rise, not in chaos but in clarity, not in destruction but in direction, the ground beneath the old system began to tremble, because the youth are not the future, they are the now. They are not seeds waiting to grow, they are the storm knocking at the gates of injustice, and when one leader speaks their language and mirrors their pain, he becomes the spark they've been waiting for. A spark that becomes a flame, and that flame spreads like fire through the continent. Traoré did not speak to them from a place of distance. He did not stand behind walls of power and issue commands. He stood with them, among them, like one of them. He knew their struggle because he lived it. He understood their rage not as a problem but as proof of life. He reminded them that anger, when guided by purpose, is the beginning of transformation. He told them that they are not powerless, they are only waiting to believe again, and when he spoke, the forgotten found a voice, the rejected found a cause, the silent found the courage to shout, not out of bitterness, but out of hope. He did not simply offer them promises, he offered them ownership. He gave them back the right to question, the right to organize, the right to rebuild. And in doing so, he disrupted the pattern of old men recycling broken dreams while the youth watched from the sidelines. No, he said, this time you will lead. This time your energy will not be wasted in migration or crime, but used to lift a continent. This time your strength will not serve foreign masters, but will be the engine of African rebirth. And the youth responded, not with slogans, but with steps, not with hashtags alone, but with hands ready to build. In the streets, in the schools, in the fields, they began to believe again that Africa can be theirs, that justice can wear their name, that dignity can be their inheritance, not just a memory from history books. And that belief is dangerous, because a people who believe are a people who rise. A people who rise cannot be ruled by fear. And when fear is broken, systems built on fear begin to fall. That is why his connection to the youth shook the world, because it was not political, it was spiritual. It was not designed in boardrooms, it was born in struggle. When he walked among them, he carried no arrogance. He listened to their frustrations, their demands, their dreams, and he told them, "Your pain is not weakness, it is wisdom. Your rejection is not the end, it is the beginning of resistance. And your youth is not inexperience, it is your power. Do not wait for tomorrow, take hold of today." Across Africa that message began to echo. In villages where hope was a whisper, it became a song. In cities where futures were sold, it became a shield. From Nairobi to Accra, from Dar es Salaam to Windhoek, young people began to say, "If Traoré can do it, so can we. If he can stand, we can march. If he can lead, we can organize. If he can speak, we can act." And that is what global powers fear, not just one man rising, but a generation following. Because once the youth unite across borders, the old games no longer work. The puppets lose their strings, the lies lose their power. The systems built to divide crumble under the weight of one unifying dream, an Africa led by its own sons and daughters, shaped by its own vision, and powered by its youngest hearts. They fear this unity because it cannot be bought, cannot be bribed, cannot be silenced. It is raw, it is real, and it is rising, and that is the legacy Traoré has begun. Not a single act of rebellion, but a continental awakening. Not just a protest, but a plan. Not just noise, but a new narrative. He told the youth, "You are not too young to lead, you are too important to wait." And those words broke the chains of apathy. They turned frustration into focus, despair into discipline, pain into purpose. He did not make the youth believe in him, he made them believe in themselves. In a world where leadership has become a performance, where power is flaunted like fashion and governance has turned into a parade of empty declarations, there comes a man who governs not with noise, but with conviction. There comes a leader who does not wait for permission from former colonizers to make decisions in the interest of his people. Ibrahim Traoré stood not on stages built by others, but on the foundation of principle carved by sacrifice. He did not look over his shoulder to see if the West would approve. He did not hesitate in fear of sanctions, isolation, or media manipulation. He simply did what was right, and that is the very thing that makes him a threat to the system built on control, compromise, and cowardice. He governed with truth, not with tactics. He understood that true leadership does not bend to pressure from the outside if it means betraying justice on the inside. In every action he took, there was a message written in the language of courage. Africa will no longer be told how to lead by those who never led us to freedom. He was not arrogant, he was anchored. Anchored in the struggles of his people, grounded in the hunger of the youth, and rooted in the soil of Burkina Faso. And in choosing to serve the people before serving the global order, he proved that real power is not about controlling others. It is about refusing to be controlled. They tried to offer him deals, they tried to tempt him with comfort, they tried to break his momentum with diplomatic games and economic threats, but what they found was a man who could not be bought. A leader who had no price tag, a patriot whose loyalty could not be auctioned off to the highest bidder, and that frightened them, because the world has become too used to African leaders who beg in daylight and betray at midnight. Too used to those who say the right things in front of cameras, but do the wrong things behind closed doors. So when a leader rises who means what he says and says what he means, the machinery of global power begins to shake. He showed that a president does not need to dress in luxury to lead with vision, that simplicity can be strength, and that discipline can be more powerful than display. When he stood beside his soldiers, he wore the same boots, walked the same dust, and breathed the same air. Not as a symbol, but as a standard, because to lead people, you must be with the people. You must feel what they feel, suffer what they suffer, and rise when they rise. This kind of leadership cannot be faked, and it cannot be taught in foreign schools. It is born from conviction, and it lives in action. He did not govern with fear, but with focus. He did not rule through propaganda, but through participation. He opened his hands to the people instead of hiding behind palaces and armored walls. And when they saw him walk among them, they knew they were not alone. They knew this was not another man in a suit speaking of change while living above the struggle. They saw in him a reflection of their resistance. They saw that leadership could once again be a calling, not a career, not a transaction, but a calling. And he proved that doing what is right is more powerful than doing what is popular. He did not chase headlines. He chased healing. He did not seek applause. He sought answers. He reminded a continent that we do not need the validation of those who once violated us, that we do not need the permission of those who profited from our pain. That when we govern with clarity, with courage, and with conscience, even the mountains of oppression can move. That is why he is feared, because he makes others look in the mirror. He reveals their lies not by exposing them, but by being the truth. His example shows what is possible, and that threatens those who survive by pretending there are no options. When one man leads with principle, others begin to ask questions. They begin to wonder why they too cannot lead with integrity, why they too cannot govern with loyalty to the people instead of allegiance to foreign powers. And when questions begin, revolutions follow. Ibrahim Traoré did not only lead a nation, he challenged a narrative. The narrative that says Africans must bow before they speak, that we must ask before we act, that we must obey before we dream. He showed that leadership in Africa does not have to be a performance of weakness. It can be a declaration of purpose. That the seat of power is not for the fearful but for the faithful, and in doing so he made the impossible visible, the forgotten unforgettable, and the people unstoppable. And that is why the time for fear is over.